Okay, well, welcome everyone to our November meeting. I'm so happy for all of you guys to brave the cold and come on out on this Friday evening to join us this evening. We really are happy. I see a couple new faces here tonight, so we're really excited. For those that are just joining us here for the first time, welcome to the Eleanor and Franklin Roosevelt Democratic Club. We're one of the oldest Democratic clubs, I think, in Prince George's County. Last year, we just celebrated our 40th anniversary here in Prince George's County. And so we do welcome you here to our club meeting this evening. Typically, we start off with the Pledge of Allegiance. And so I don't know if one of our Sergeant-at-Arms, Matt, if you want to lead us with the Pledge of Allegiance this evening. Everyone can stand.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Matt. I am going to do a brief introduction of our speaker for the evening, who is Ms. Angela Alsobrooks. She is the current state's attorney for Prince George's County. Ms. Alsobrooks was born and raised in Prince George's County, born in Camp Springs, and currently resides in Upper Marlboro. She went to Duke University for undergrad and to the University of Maryland for law school. She actually served as the state's attorney before becoming the state's attorney. And while serving in the state's attorney's office, she worked in the domestic violence unit and actually helped form the domestic violence unit in the state's attorney's office at that time. It had never existed, and she was one of the people who kind of spearheaded that charge to get that established there in the state's attorney's office. After leaving the state's attorney's office, she was appointed to serve as the head of the Revenue Authority for Prince George's County. Under her leadership as head of the Revenue Authority, she did increase our revenues by 40%. That we were bringing in, so did a wonderful job in that. And then in 2010, she decided to throw her hat in the ring and actually run in a very crowded field for state's attorney, and actually won overhandedly in that election and then was reelected again in 2014. She currently oversees a staff of over 100 attorneys and over 110 different paraprofessionals under the state's attorney's office, and I think you can easily say it is the largest law firm here in Prince George's County. And so she's going to talk tonight about the things that she's done and things that she wants to do in the future. And so without further ado, I definitely want to welcome Ms. Angela Alsobrooks.
Good evening, everybody. I am so grateful to have been invited tonight. I want to thank Nicole Williams for the invitation, and thank the Democratic Club, and thank all of you all for being out tonight on a Friday night when I suppose you could be home relaxing or preparing for Thanksgiving, but we love Prince George's County. But anyway, it gives me great pleasure tonight to have an opportunity to talk to you, to give you some idea about my background, to talk to you about my record, and also to talk to you about the vision that I have for Prince George's. It's always great. I start out by letting you know that I am a native Prince Georgian, so I am so very, very proud of that fact that I was born and raised in Prince George's. What I have to tell you is how we came to Prince George's County. You may know there are a good number of people in Prince George's who are Southerners. And my mother is a person who came here from a place called Seneca, South Carolina. And my father was from a place called Wadesboro, North Carolina. Well, in 1956, my mother was living in Seneca with her family when her grandfather was murdered by a sheriff's deputy. And this occurred on July 4th of 1956. And what happened during that time, the criminal justice system was very different than it is now. And my family was actually told, if you don't leave, we will kill the whole family. So by July 19th of 1956, my great-grandmother had to make a decision about where to move our family. And she decided that we would come north and came to Prince George's County to Fairmont Heights, Maryland, where my mother actually graduated from high school. My great-grandmother was a woman who was dynamic. She was what we call today a bad woman. She was born in 1897. She was someone who I was very close to. In fact, she lived until my first year in law school. And she really did impart to me many, many lessons, but the one that was very helpful to me was I grew up in a family that was a no complaining sort of family. It's still this way. And what my great-grandmother would say very often, if anyone complained about anything in our family, she would say very simply, you do not have the right to complain about the things that you don't like. And in her very southern way, she'd say, if you don't like it, you go further and you do better. This was a lesson that I really did internalize. It meant that when injustices faced us, whatever the issue was, it was our responsibility to step up and to do the best we could to change it. So the lessons that my grandmother taught me combined with the lessons that my parents taught me. I had two fantastic parents who still live in Prince George's County in Camp Springs. They married fairly young. Their first home was in Suitland, Maryland. And neither of my parents had an opportunity to be college educated. But it was a priority of theirs that I would be educated and that my sister would be educated as well. And so they worked so hard. I have to tell you, for example, that my mother retired 2 years ago. And she had spent nearly 50 years, mostly as a receptionist. She is the person whose work ethic was transferred to me. She transferred all of the various characteristics about working hard, what integrity looked like, respecting people. These were the lessons that she taught me. My parents also, as I said, were determined that I would go to college. And so I made a very controversial choice. All of us Prince Georgians understand how controversial it was to decide to go to Duke University. This is a very controversial choice that I made, was to go to Duke University. I graduated from Duke University and then redeemed myself and decided to come back to the University of Maryland and to go to law school. And so 20 years ago, I was given the great honor of being hired as the first ever full-time domestic violence lawyer to work in the office of the state's attorney. And from there, I was allowed over the years to develop a career in public service. And that career was rooted in my very firm belief that integrity and good character matters, that demonstrated leadership matters, and that getting things done matters. And so I worked in that office for about 6 years as a prosecutor, and then had the opportunity to be hired to go over to the county executive's office, where I worked for about a year as an education liaison, working with the school system to connect families to the school system. After that, I was appointed as executive director of the county's Revenue Authority. Now, the Revenue Authority, for those of you who don't know, used to be known as the Parking Authority. Oversaw parking operations for the county, so this is yet another unpopular position, right? To lead parking enforcement for Prince George's County. But it gave me a marvelous opportunity to lead an agency that had about 85 employees, about a $13 million budget. And one of the real challenges that I faced when I came to the Revenue Authority was within the first year of being there, discovered that the place was being stolen blind. There was a man who was running that agency, and I discovered through auditing the finances of that agency that an employee stole $97,000 in 1 month. Wow. This meant that we had to work really hard to make sure that we shored up the finances of that agency, to build it very simply. First, by treating well the employees who were there. We had many employees who were working in the New Carrollton garage who were earning at the time that we were there, and they worked 24 hours. Many of these folks worked all week long. They worked on holidays. They worked in the snow in that garage, and they were not being paid a fair wage. And so one of the things that we had to do was to make sure we increased the salaries of the employees who were there, the benefits, and to really treat them well. And by the time I left that agency 7 years later, I have to tell you that we had increased the revenues of the agency by 40%. The agency was an extremely strong agency, and to this day, the agency that I inherited, that was a $13 million agency, has now grown to a $100 million agency in Prince George's County. It's extremely strong. The Revenue Authority owned the land that the Boulevard and the Capitol Center is located on, for those of you who are familiar with the Boulevard. And what you may recall about the Boulevard is that there used to be a time when there was a Borders bookstore there. You may recall when there was an Office Depot and a Circuit City, all located at the Boulevard at the Capitol Center. And one of the things that happened is that many of the stores went out of business, went bankrupt. And during that time, we were trying to attract businesses to come to the Boulevard. And what I learned is that there were many businesses that were reluctant to come to Prince George's County, and guess why? They said, we do not want to invest in Prince George's County because the crime has run amok. We're not interested in coming to Prince George's County because we believe it has a crime problem. This was important to me, to understand the very critical relationship between business, education, and crime. They are inextricable. Add to that a conversation that I was having with a childhood friend, and I started telling the friend, you know, I grew up in Prince George's County, and when I grew up here, I could play in the front yard. And I would say, you know, my mother didn't have to have her eye on me the whole time I was in the front yard. In fact, I could ride my bike, and I felt free. And I was saying, you know, I have a daughter who at the time was 4 years old. And I was telling this friend that I was so concerned that my daughter did not have the same sense of security that I had growing up in Prince George's County, and I thought there was something wrong with this. Well, the friend cut me off and said, you know what, unless you plan to change it, let's never have this discussion again. And then he went on to say, you know, when your daughter grows up and comes back to you to ask you what you did about what you saw, what are you going to tell her? How smart you were, what great ideas you had in your mind, or are you going to be able to say to your daughter what you actually did to change it for her? And he went on to say he owns a martial arts school in Camp Springs to this day. He said, you know what, Angela, you may get in the ring and get knocked out, but this is no excuse for you not to try. And so in a year where we had, as you've heard, 5 candidates in a race where I had never run for office before, I had a 4-year-old child, had never raised a dime, I decided it was important enough for me to contribute to Prince George's County by changing both the perception and the reality of crime, which we understood would increase investment, would contribute to our quality of life. I thought this was an important way to contribute, and so I ran for office in 2010 and was very fortunate to be elected as your state's attorney. The almost 7 years since I have been elected, I have sought to really honor the trust that you have placed in me, and by delivering everything we promised. The things that we promised, I made sure we delivered on our promises. The first thing we said is that we would change the perception and the reality of crime in Prince George's. Now, we have not erased crime, and so I won't delude you and tell you that we have. But what we have done is to establish the kinds of relationships. We have the best relationship in our office right now with our police department, the sheriff's office, and all of our other law enforcement partners. This is the best relationship we've had in about 25 years. And as a result of the relationships that we have developed, we first organized something called strategic investigations to work against violent repeat offenders, to make sure individuals who, there's a very small group of people who commit the majority of violent crimes in our county. And what we saw is in the first 4 years alone that I was elected, the homicide rate in Prince George's County declined by 40%. We also saw a decline of 37% in overall violent crime, and we are sitting right now in 2017 at the lowest crime rate that we have seen in Prince George's County since the 1980s. Now again, we haven't erased crime. I want to thank Councilmember Turner. We had great partners who made sure that we had the right investments to make it prosecutors. Our prosecutors were earning 20% less than all of our neighboring jurisdictions. We were also severely under-resourced. Over the last 6 years, we have increased our budget from $14 million to $20 million by going to our state partners, federal partners, and making sure that we're not only able to retain our lawyers, but that we have the best and brightest possible. The other thing I will tell you is that it has been extremely important to me that we not only react to crime, but that we prevent it from happening in the first place. This has been 2 programs I want to tell you about that have been especially important. We know 80% of all of the prisons in the United States are full of individuals who have dropped out of high school. So there's no real mystery. When we talk about impacting crime, we know exactly where to go. It's to education. But we have to get there earlier and earlier. And so I started a program called I Belong Here in the State's Attorney's Office. I couldn't wait for our government partners or anyone else to intervene. We knew exactly where we needed to go. So we selected the 3 most truant middle schools in Prince George's County, and I sent prosecutors into those schools every month. What we do is incentivize school attendance. It turns out to be very simple. Rita's Ice, pizza parties, athletic gear, encouragement and motivation. We send our prosecutors in, and we just celebrated this past spring. Bowie State University is our partner. We bused in the 900 students in our program to Bowie State University, where they offered them tours of the university, a free lunch. They even brought out the band and cheerleaders to celebrate with these young people. And what we found is of the schools that we have been in that had 60 and 70% attendance rates, we are now up to 96 and 98% attendance in the schools that we've been in. So we know that this is possible. I belong here is what we are teaching our children, that this is where you belong. On a college campus, seeing yourself succeed and be educated. Another program that I want to tell you about that we started is called Back on Track. Now there is a woman, her name is Kamala Harris. She's a senator out of California. We talk about bad ladies. This is a super bad woman. Well, Kamala is a person who started a program called Back on Track that I actually read about in a magazine when I was running for office in 2010. And I said, you know what, if I'm elected, I believe this is something that we can replicate in Prince George's County. And so I flew out to California upon election, studied the program, and we've replicated it. And what it involves is this. For first-time nonviolent drug dealers who are between the ages of 18 and 26 years old, we first have them come in and they plead guilty because we think accountability is very important. But after they plead guilty, we have worked with the community college to set up 6 areas where they can get their certifications, where the job market is plentiful. This means IT, hospitality, construction, for example. So we send our participants to get their education. They get their GED if they need it. We've also partnered with Catholic Charities. Catholic Charities gives us a caseworker for each of the participants. And what, for example, there's a young man named Calvin. Calvin came to us. He had slept in his car the night before his hearing. He wept through his entire first hearing. He was relieved to have been arrested. But Calvin came to court, bless his heart, on his first hearing. He wore a t-shirt with a nice, big fat marijuana leaf down the front of his t-shirt. So we said, now Calvin, for your first hearing, your drug case, you may not want to wear the marijuana leaf to court. But you know what? We can work on this. And so Catholic Charities has a clothing closet. By the second time Calvin came to court, I wish you had seen him. He had a dress shirt on, a tie, a top hat. I mean, Calvin looked fantastic. This is what Catholic Charities does for our participants. Finally, I spent about 2 years just meeting with businesses, WSSC, Pepco, Wegmans, saying to them, can you guarantee a job for our participants, for the individuals who are in our program? And so what happens is, if you are successful in this program and it lasts from 12 to 18 months, you leave us with your certification in education from the community college. We wipe the felony off your record for one time only. You also get workforce development skills, a job, we guarantee a job, and a mentor for 1 whole year following the program. Now this program, I have to tell you, only cost us $5,000 per participant. And as you know, it costs us $47,000 a year to incarcerate. So it's a much smarter investment for our community. We find the recidivism rate out of California is so low in this program, very, very low. And I don't use a single tax dollar to fund the program. Instead, I use asset forfeiture dollars to pay for this program. So that is Back on Track Prince George's. And what it demonstrates simply is there are individuals in our community who need second chances. There are times where they deserve the support of this community to get on their feet, to be productive, and to join the workforce. What we know about them fulfilling their potential reminds me so much of Prince George's. Over the years that I have lived here, and I believe that many of you will say the same thing, we're always discussing around every election in particular, we say, you know, Prince George's County is right on the brink. We're almost there. We have all of this great potential. This is what it could look like. We're almost there. You know, it has been my great joy to not only serve as your state's attorney, but I'm running for county executive because I believe that it is time for Prince George's County to fulfill its potential as well. And in order for Prince George's County to fulfill its potential, our children must first fulfill theirs. What do we mean by that? It is unequivocal that we must really focus, first of all, as county executive, on education. It is the very sacred obligation that we have to every single child in our community. It is sacred. Every child, without respect for your zip code, every child in this community is owed a solid education. So we will focus first on education, and we will do so very early. Many of our kids, by the time they get to kindergarten, are behind already. We know that pre-K education is critically important to the success of our children. I don't know how many of you were able to read the Washington Post article. It was about a month ago in the paper, and the title was very simple. It said, rich kids go to school and poor kids stay home with grandma. And what they share with us is if you do not have exposure to education at 3 and 4 years old, statistics show us and the studies show us that children show up at school and they are nearly 1 whole year behind in language development, in vocabulary, and so 3 and 4 year olds, it's critically important that they are exposed to education. We're going to invest in pre-K education for our children and invest in literacy. Statistics also show us if you are not literate by the 3rd grade, you are more than 4 times as likely as others to drop out of high school. Literacy is extremely important. It is a place where we will invest. We will not only invest in our young children, but I believe that there ought to be a greater investment in vocational education and in continuing adult education as well. There are a good number of individuals in our community who, because of automation, who because of the changing work environment, are out of work. These are individuals who ought to be exposed to opportunities to continue to improve themselves as well and to join the workforce. And so we will focus on vocational education both in high school, where I believe we miss many, many opportunities. This building is gorgeous. Our homes, we talk about businesses, and many of the places that we enjoy are built with the hands of individuals who too often we have very little respect for. So we will not only invest in vocational education, but we must change the way we talk about it and the way we think about vocational education. We have got to create for our children a pathway that puts them very early on a path to go to college, and if they so choose, to have positive careers as well. So it's not just college readiness, but career readiness as well. And I believe that we will have an opportunity to go to businesses, to ask them which skills they need for us to instill in our children so that they will be prepared to take advantage of many of the workforce. So vocational education is a place that we will invest. And I believe, you know what, with our children, it's not going to be enough to just focus on what they read, to whether or not they can count. We're going to also have to focus on the kind of people they become. So I'm a very big proponent of character education, emphasizing the very positive attributes of hard work and determination, and making sure that we also focus on the kind of people that we are producing in our schools. I'll talk about 2 other areas, and then I'll take questions, because I tell you I can talk all night long about Prince George's County. Healthcare and wellness are areas that I have a passion for. And I have learned that in Prince George's County, and I don't know how many of this shocks, but it shocks me to learn that Prince George's County has the highest rate of diabetes per capita in the country. This is a very shocking statistic for me. Add to that on any given day, if you go to Upper Marlboro to the Department of Corrections, every day we take in 75% of the people that we take in at the Department of Corrections every day are intoxicated when they arrive. Yet we don't have a single detox center in Prince George's County. We also have 1/3 of all of the people we take in at our correctional facility every day are mentally ill when they get there. And so to me, it is something shameful about the fact that if you suffer from an addiction or mental illness, the place where you are guaranteed help and treatment, you are more likely to get that help and treatment in jail than in our community. We're going to change that. I believe that this is wrong, and it is a place that I will focus. We will not just build, we have wonderful, beautiful development projects that are coming to Prince George's, but in my mind, it is not enough to build beautiful buildings and not invest in building people. And so we will make the investments to make sure we are building strong people and strong families as much as we're focused in other places. And finally, I will tell you about commercial business. Prince George's County has got to grow its commercial tax base. It just has to. We have for very long tried to support the people of this community to pay for the goods and services we need for education, for public safety, for roads on the backs of citizens. The reason that I say that is if you compare, for example, Montgomery County, where they have about a 70% commercial tax base and about a 30% residential tax base, Prince George's County is just the opposite. We pay for what we need here. About 70% of it comes from your residential taxes, and only 30% of it comes from commercial taxes. This is a huge burden, which means that we have got to focus more on business development. And the way that we will do that is through small, local, minority business, where all the opportunity is to develop business in our communities. We will go to existing businesses proactively and discover the ways that we can support them and help them in growing. Some of that will be in lending, some of it will be in bonding, it will be in training, but we will continue to grow business in Prince George's County as well as educate a workforce that can help us to attract the businesses that we desire to come here. Finally, I'll say this last thing. I have coffee every morning at 7-Eleven. I meet all of my friends and constituents. If anybody ever wants to meet up with me, I'm at 7-Eleven every morning. I'm there again about 3 or 4 o'clock. I have my coffee again and meet all kind of wonderful people there. And what I have come to understand there at gas stations and in grocery stores and at the church where I worship here in the county is that people are concerned about the responsiveness of government. And whether or not the taxes that you pay here, because Prince Georgians pay the second highest tax rate in the state of Maryland. And I have heard that people say, you know what, we just want to know that you pick up litter, that you pick up the leaves when we need it, that you remove snow, that you take care of our trash, and that the government is responsive. When I call you, that you answer, that you respond to the needs that we have. And you know what, we do you no favor by doing so. It is what you can expect from me, and expect from this government, is that we will respond to you, and that the government will be agile, and that it will be responsive and customer service oriented. So I guess what I say is, I told you about my great-grandmother and how she came here 3 generations ago. She selected Prince George's County because she saw in it great promise. She knew this was a place where she could bring her family, where we could enjoy the prosperity that America promises to all of us. It is a place where I believe America ought to be as good as it's promised, that every family, I believe to my core, in the time that I have been here, that every parent loves their child the same way that I love mine, that we each care about our family's health and wellness, that we care about the seniors and elders in our community, and we want the exact same things for them. I believe that we can fulfill the promise that my great-grandmother saw for Prince George's County. We will do that when we invest in education. We will do that when we invest in safe neighborhoods, and we will do that when we ensure that the promise that belongs to every single one of our children is fulfilled through our efforts. And so I ask you for your support as I continue to serve you. I have for the last 20 years, and I have to tell you, it has been the single greatest honor of my life to serve the community that has raised me. But guess what? We're not done yet. I really believe that the best is yet to come. I believe likewise that Prince George's County is the crown jewel of Maryland. And through our collective efforts, we will make sure that she is all she ought to be, and that our kids can grow and thrive here. So thank you for being out tonight. I don't know whether there's time for questions. If so, I'd be very happy to answer them. But again, I want to thank you for allowing me to serve you and to ask you for your support.
So I know beforehand we had asked for people to submit some questions beforehand. So we do have, I have a list of a couple of questions that we have gotten. So I can, ask some of those. But if people have other questions that you may have that you probably don't hear asked, just speak up. But I'll just have like maybe 2. We'll start off with maybe 2 questions. Yep. And so one question has to do with, earlier last month, we had someone here from Fair Elections. I'm talking about the Fair Elections campaign that occurred in Howard County and Montgomery County, and the legislation that was passed to allow a public finance system for individuals who are running for county executive and for county council. And so I wanted to get your thoughts as to what your thoughts about that program, and if something like that could and should happen.
Yeah, I think it's something that we're already looking at. I know we have a council member here. I think it's absolutely something that we should consider here. I think we ought to make it so that every person who is interested in serving in public office has the opportunity to do so. So it's something I would like to look at the legislation to see what all the details are of it, but I certainly think we ought to make it possible. Public service is important, and I think we ought to open it up to make sure that everyone has a fair opportunity to serve our community. So I agree. Yes.
Good. Thanks. Lynn's on board. You have a question, Kurt? Go ahead.
Vocational education, I'm just really glad to see you're talking about it. I'm in the plumbing division, I'm a plumber, and I'm glad to see that you're bringing that up. Just so many young people got this idea that they got to go to college and you have to incur all this debt, and it's just really, and some guys are just not made out for it.
Yep.
And so I'm just really glad and encouraged that you
Thank you. And you know what else I've learned about, and I didn't realize this, that over 60% of the young people who we send to college do not graduate after 6 years. And so I think we ought to really make it possible, again, that for the ones who are not interested in going to college and accumulating the debt, the truth of it is you can earn a magnificent life style through vocational education, and we ought to make every opportunity possible to our young people to succeed.
And just to follow up, it seems like vocational education is like, okay, you're not smart enough to make it in class, so we're going to throw you, you're a little bit, you don't fit in. We're going to throw you into the vocational school. Yeah, so it's almost like I hate to say, what's the bad schools now, where they throw the bad kids to vocational schools. So that's sort of what I sense goes on.
Yeah,
because they don't know what to do with them.
And I agree with you, which is why I said we have to not only change the opportunity for it, but change how we talk about it and how we think about it. Because the truth is, I could never work as an electrician. You have to be very smart to work as an electrician. And I think we have to be honest about those things too. It's a solid career. It's a career. That is possible, and too many of our young people miss out on those opportunities. I've met with employers even during the course of this campaign who say how many opportunities they have available, but just don't have the workforce. It's up to us to train the workforce so that they are prepared to take advantage of all of those opportunities. They're coming here, and we need to make sure they're ready for it.
I know Jerry, well, so I'm gonna ask a question that may get to your question, Jerry. So Jerry's really big about education, and that's something that we got a lot of questions about the education system here in Prince George's County, especially in light of kind of what a lot of people were seeing in the news and things like that. One with the things about the changing of the grades, and just also, you know, with some of the issues that came up last year with individuals who, you know, were prosecuted through your office for, you know, preying upon our children in the school system and things like that. And so I know a lot of people want to know what your thoughts are as it relates to, you know, kind of the audit that came out last week, as well as just some of the other issues that we've been hearing about in the news as it relates to our education system.
You know, what I can tell you about it is I have been somewhere between heartbroken and irate over what I've seen of kids. You know, the truth is we are judged as a community by how well we take care of children. That's just the truth of it. And we really have to do a much better job in how we care for children, from caring for them physically. When we think about Deontay Carraway and the sex case that occurred in our schools, and I'm going to tell you, that case has been resolved, but essentially what we had was an orgy in a bathroom of an elementary school that went on and on and on, and who didn't know that this was occurring? We have to do much better to provide safe environments for our kids to learn. When we think about the audit that just was released, I think we ought to be so disturbed and so sad. So sad. Whoever thinks it's a good idea to send a kid into the world who is unprepared to take care of him or herself? And that's the truth of what it is that we send children into the world who were unprepared to care for themselves. And you know what I think, and this is not popular to say, it is an issue that would have to be handled culturally as a community. We have to decide what the standards are that we set for our children and how we will meet them. Because the reality is, a child who is failing in high school failed long before they got to 12th grade. And my question is, who knew that this child was struggling and did nothing to help the child? And so 2 weeks before, it's too late. It's too late. We have failed the child long before they got to 12th grade. And it is the collective responsibility, I believe, of our entire community, everybody who interfaces with that child, to ensure the success of our children. That's from our families, teachers, everybody has a real obligation to the children. And so I think we are obviously going to have to do much better than we have done. I believe it's possible. I think the investment has to be an investment that not only rests with people who have children in the school system, it's all of our responsibility. And if we can't think about it because it is what's best for children, it's what's best for the entire community, for our schools to thrive. It means not only does crime come down, it means businesses come here, it means your property values go up, but it also means that we are fulfilling, again, that obligation that I believe we have to every single child in this community, the sacred obligation to make sure they are prepared and ready to join us productively in our communities. And so we have got to do a much better job of caring for children.
So did I get to your question, Jerry? Not quite.
Oh, it's a good start.
Okay, all right, well, I'll let you ask your question.
So with these various different scandals and what the audit said, it seems to me it's time for you, either in your current position or maybe next year as the county executive, to have an Atlanta gold standard investigation, not just an audit. And what happened in Atlanta was actually the governor who appointed two prosecutors and provided them with 60 investigators, and he interviewed 2,000 staff people in order to find out just how much corruption there was in the Atlanta school system. So I mean, hopefully you will consider having a serious investigation
Atlanta gold standard level investigation of the school system and not just in the hood.
Okay.
Yes.
I was interested in your statistics on the health of people being arrested. So do you have some ideas on how we can better provide community-based health services, community-based mental services in Prince George's County to basically get it so that they're not getting the services in jail, but in the community, and improving it for everybody?
Thank you. So the question is how do we provide those health services that prevent people essentially from being in jail and getting them that way? The answer to it to me is to start earlier. I think there are a good number of conditions that show up in children. Many of them show up in elementary school. I think that we have an opportunity, for example, by making sure that we have social workers in more and more of our schools. We'll have an opportunity to identify the children in those situations who have, for example, if we think about addictions. Some of that progresses from individuals who have been abused and who have been untreated. I think we have an opportunity to identify earlier and earlier. What I have found in my experience is a good number of our kids sit in classrooms who have watched violence, who have been witnesses to it, and who have observed many other things that lead to problems and complications as they get older. And so I think some of the issues that go unaddressed in childhood, and some of it's addiction too. We have a huge addiction problem among young people in our schools. It is something that is unpopular. People don't want to talk about it. We have a lot of our children who are addicted earlier and earlier to marijuana, for example, that if you talk to any healthcare professional will tell you leads to many of the mental health conditions that we see, but we don't want to address it in children. So I think really getting to children earlier and earlier and addressing some of the healthcare issues that they have and assisting them and their families in addressing those issues will go a long way towards stopping the cycle that we will see that generally leads from a failed educational experience and leads them directly to jail. So I believe also making community-based treatment more available is important. We have a good number of mobile units. I have met with Cigna, Kaiser, and they have mobile health units that will help in some of the other issues we're seeing, everything from dentistry to we have many of our kids who are in emergency rooms getting $2,000 treatments because we have a huge asthma problem where we could have a $20 inhaler that we provided through some of the mobile units that would help us to address some of the illnesses that we see, breathing-related illnesses that we see in children. So I think a really proactive approach, a primary care sort of approach to healthcare, community-based treatment will be going a long way toward helping us to address these issues.
Yeah, thank you. Now I'm totally blind, and I'm with a number of groups with disability. You did mention persons as analysis now. Now, in Prince George County, we do not have a center for persons with disability. We have an independent living center in Washington, D.C. We have an independent living center in Montgomery County. We have an independent living center in Northern Virginia. When people in Prince George County, like myself, are disabled, and we want to go to learn how to use any type of equipment or independent living. Now, when I needed to learn how to use the talking computer, okay, I had to go to Baltimore and stay for 2 or 3 months to learn to talk computer. When I needed to learn how to use a cane, I had to go to D.C. to learn how to use a cane. So the people in Prince George County and our population is getting older, and as if you live long enough, you're going to have some kind of limitation of disability. So what is it that we can do to have a center for independent living here in the county to serve our citizens?
You know what, it's just what you said. I thank you for bringing that to my attention. That's part of what we have to do is to study best practices in this jurisdiction. That's one of the areas, to be honest with you, I have not heard anyone raise. And so I thank you for raising that particular issue. A Center for Individuals with Disabilities is something that I will certainly consider and look into to make sure that we're providing those kinds of services. And so I thank you for raising that. But we have that same issue in so many different areas, including Alzheimer's, where we have a good number of family members who are caring for others with Alzheimer's without us having the facilities that we need. There are many needs that have gone unmet, but I thank you for raising that one. I think that's one that we ought to look at and see how we replicate what is happening well in other areas, and we will absolutely do that. Thank you.
Oh, Lynn, and then the young lady.
I'm very excited about all the gun deaths going on in our country. What can we do in Prince George's County?
Well, I agree with you about the gun deaths. One of the things that we have done well in Maryland was the Firearm Safety Act. The Firearm Safety Act was very important. It was 2013. I worked along with the other lawmakers to make sure that we were able to focus on two areas where guns were concerned. One is straw purchasers. One of the issues that we had is that guns are in the hands of the wrong individuals, and that you are able, disqualified individuals had a very easy path to acquire handguns. One of the things the Firearm Safety Act addressed was making sure that we closed the loophole there, that in order to acquire a gun, you gotta leave a fingerprint, that it also requires certain training. And so straw purchasers, that's a huge issue for us, is having disqualified individuals have guns in their hands. So we have to make sure that we're enforcing that. The other area that we really tried to close the loophole with the Firearm Safety Act is having individuals who suffer from mental illnesses, who also have ready access to firearms. And so through that Firearm Safety Act, one of the things that's required is that if you are voluntarily, involuntarily committed to a mental health facility, that all of our systems should be communicating, making sure that it is known that through the court system, through those who sell guns, that you have been a person who has been committed for over 30 days, and to disqualify that individual until they get clearance from their doctor to possess a gun. What I think about that is that we have very unlovingly permitted individuals who suffer from mental illness to possess guns. They kill themselves, they kill others, and I think we have to do more to protect people who suffer from mental illnesses. And so that's one of the areas that I think we have to be very careful about, is making sure that we're enforcing all of those areas. And so gun possession is a huge problem, making sure that we're getting those guns off the street. That's what we're seeing now, is in Prince George's, interestingly enough, the two areas where we're seeing a lot of problems, we've seen huge declines in the homicide rate here. The two areas that remain steady, believe it or not, are family violence. You are more likely than ever not to be killed by a stranger. In this county, you are more likely to be killed by someone you know or love. And so family violence is a huge issue, making sure we regulate guns in cases where, again, people suffer from mental illness, or where there's a history that we can document of domestic violence and other things, making sure we cause those people not to have guns. The other area we're seeing is the drug trade. That's the other area where we're seeing the guns are used. These young people who get the guns, the first sign of a conflict, they use it. They are heavily armed, we find, and they use the gun. And so those are the two areas where I think we have the best opportunity to stop the violence. But we are, believe it or not, doing fairly. We still have a lot of work to do, but we're seeing, even this year, for example, we're down 15 homicides from where we were last year. And so we're seeing some progress, not enough, because one is too much. But we're really, the department, I believe, is very aggressive, and our office is working with them. We have a whole new gun task force and a new gun unit that we just started in our office to make sure that we're tracking. When we collect guns, we're now tracking where the gun came from to make sure that we're able to recover more and more.
You have a question?
Yeah, I was wondering, since you're coming from an attorney background, what your thoughts were about getting bail money out of, out of the court system for those who have been arrested. They haven't been convicted of anything. They've been arrested, and a lot of times they cannot get out of jail because their only crime is they can't afford bail.
Well, I'm glad.
The state's assembly, they tried to deal with it and were successful. But I was wondering what
Well, they were. So let me tell you what happened there.
Okay.
Okay, let me tell you. Well, let me tell you. So that I was very involved in bail reform last year. As a matter of fact, I was the only prosecutor in the state of Maryland who went down to testify in favor of bail reform. I was very surprised. No other prosecutor in the state of Maryland showed up to advocate for bail reform. What happened is Eric Holder, our former Attorney General, came to came to Maryland after collecting some research. And to your point, what we're talking about with bail reform is pre-trial. Individuals who have not been convicted of any crime, but who have been arrested and who were held prior to trial. And we learned that a good number of them are held not because they're dangerous or because they're a flight risk, but because they're poor. This is the information that former Attorney General Eric Holder brought to Annapolis and said that we are doing this wrong. In Maryland, the information he collected is that minorities are paid 45% higher bail for the exact same crime as others. You find that in Baltimore City, you pay 5 times the amount of bail for the identical crime in Montgomery County. This is the information that he brought. And so what the Court of Appeals did was to change a rule. Their rule now requires that they first have to inquire as to whether or not you're dangerous. The court, secondly, has to inquire as to whether or not you're a flight risk. And if those two things are present, they hold you without any bail. D.C. does not have bail. There are no bail bondsmen in D.C. They do not have a bail system at all. Instead, they use pre-trial. They have a very robust pre-trial unit that says, if they're concerned about you coming back to trial, you put on an ankle bracelet. There are other ways they monitor you prior to trial. But they say now that the third thing every judge has to inquire about is whether if you're not a flight risk and you're not too dangerous, because again, if you're dangerous, you committed a dangerous crime, and we're concerned about your fleeing, you should be held without bond pending trial. But if the only reason you're being held is because you are poor, then the court has to consider that. So that's the rule change that the court introduced, and they voted unanimously to change their own rule, to make sure that now they have to inquire as to whether poverty is an issue. So an example of this, if you're stopped because you're driving on a suspended license, we have individuals who have been arrested and held. They don't have $1,500 to get out of jail. Of course you don't. Because in many instances, that's how you got in that situation in the first place. The question is whether or not you are more dangerous because you don't have $1,500 than the person who does. That's what we're now considering, is whether or not in many of these people who are held, because they're driving without a license or some other low-risk crime, they're usually held on average 5 to 9 days. They lose their jobs, they lose their housing, they really do lose their footing. And so what we are looking at with bail reform is a way to pre-trial monitor individuals who fall into that category to ensure that we're not basically perpetuating poverty and encouraging people to become more active in crime. So I was the only prosecutor in the state of Maryland who showed up along with Attorney General Brian Frosh to testify on behalf of this legislation. And guess what? It did pass. It did pass, but you know what happened? And I'm just going to be honest about it. One of our senators went to Annapolis and tried to put in legislation to block the rule change. Showed up with...
I'll answer the question for you later.
Showed up and tried to block the legislation. Did not want it to take effect on July 1st. Went down with the bail bonds person with him to the front of the Legislative Black Caucus and tried to put on some confusing reason why the rule change should not take effect when the Maryland Court of Appeals voted unanimously to change its own rule. Our senator went to Annapolis and tried to introduce legislation to block it, saying we would cause bail bondsmen to lose business, that their businesses would shut down. Now, this is documented in the Washington Post. I didn't make it up, and I was down there about to have a heart attack. And I had to tell myself, maybe you shouldn't have a heart attack from this whole thing. But it's awful. It perpetuates economic injustice. It's a huge issue, but I have been a person who has been there fighting. I've not only fought that, but I fought in every other way that I could to make sure that people could provide for themselves. The greatest lie I have ever heard, and then I'm going to take the next question, is that people don't want to work. The truth of it is many of them do. They may not know the best way to do it, but everyone wants to take care of themselves and to take care of their families, and we ought to help them. So I have been there on every occasion I could to advocate, to have people be independent and able to take care of themselves.
Can I ask you a quick follow-up? So your position is that if you're elected to be our county executive, that you would make sure that that's put in place in our county?
Oh, it already is.
But it's not being enforced. Like you said, you're not being enforced.
No, it is. So this is what I'm telling you. The Court of Appeals made a rule change.
Right.
They voted on it. And the rule change says they now have to consider when you come before them in court, they cannot hold you just because you're poor. They have to consider alternatives, pretrial alternatives. That was passed. And the legislation that somebody tried to introduce to block it failed. This is a good thing. We don't want them reintroducing that legislation to try to overturn it to give.
So I know a personal situation where someone has been incarcerated for 7 months and they have not had a bail hearing.
Not a bail hearing? They haven't even had a bail hearing? That's something we ought to look at because that can't happen.
Absolutely.
That's unconstitutional.
Yeah.
So let's make sure, let me get the information. Gina Ford is here. I want to thank Gina. I want to thank Tyler for being here. I want to thank Sergeant Ashton for making sure we don't get blown off the earth. Thank you for coming out too. Let's take down the name of the person. It's unconstitutional. There, you have to. So, yeah.
All right, we'll have one more question from Conrad, and then we have some other follow-up business. And so, if people have individual questions, I don't know what your time is like, but you know, just want to move forward with the other things we have this evening. So, Conrad, you have the last word.
And I've learned from the service of 14 years in the city council how to say a lot in fewer words, which is difficult.
And prosecutors don't know how to do this, by the way. So lawyers don't know how to do this. So we can learn from you.
The theme of your campaign for me, and probably many others, seems to be dealing with inequities. And as chair of the County Arts Council, I know that the arts community is doing a lot actually to address those needs. And attending the session on rezoning changes that are taking place, or about to take place, at the Sports and Learning Complex, inequity again was the theme. And there were a number of folks who felt that there are members of the communities whose concerns weren't going to be concerned in the drive to provide more opportunities for economic development. What I did suggest to them was actually, because like now we've got about 7 or 8 roads, and generally will be a section where someone, let's say from the Park and Planning Commission, would be here moderating, listening, and so forth. And I suggested, what about the idea of having the community in tables and actually perform something like a charrette, so that then folks would have more of an input that actually developers could benefit more from. And in the process of reaching out and connecting with people, then that at least increases the chances for greater acceptance of the proposal, because it really will have involved the community. What's your take right now on the proposed changes, and where do you see it going, and what are your concerns that you may have, and how would you address them?
So you're talking about the zoning rewrite, but I have to tell you very honestly, I think the councilman can probably tell you in gross detail more about how that process is going. Quite honestly, I know the zoning rewrite is happening. I know it is intended to make sure that smart development happens. I know that we currently do have a way for the community to have input, which I think is important in these processes, but I think what they're trying to do is to really make sure that they streamline the process so that they're not undue delays that cause many of these projects to cost additional money and to not happen. So I agree that there ought to be community input. I agree that it ought to be smart and it ought to fit the areas that we are building in, and we have to consider the character and the culture and personality of the areas, and that it ought to be really tailored to each of the areas. But in terms of the specifics of the zoning rewrite, I think Councilmember Turner can probably answer a little better than I can about.
There is a consideration for having what we consider a pre-application meeting before somebody submits an application for a development proposal, that they have to sit down with that impacted community before then. Very similar, I served in the city of Bowie, as you know, Conrad. We had a stakeholder meeting process, meaning that before it was submitted, it would go through, they'd have to provide notice, residents could come in and talk about that process. So it's very similar to that we're trying to, it's in the draft that's being considered now. And so I don't think that's going to change. If there are ways to improve it, be more than willing to have those comments.
And just a quick follow-up. I'm hoping that Prince George's County, because I understand it may come up later with the county council, multiple dwelling units, because there was like a religious fervor that Montgomery County and the former county executive had put together the MDU proposal, so that it reduced exactly the differences of those that are wealthy, those that are more economically challenged, and it has a whole different feel to it. You have more affordable units.
So workforce housing, to encourage workforce housing.
Right.
And I agree that we need more workforce housing. We have to consider nurses and firefighters and teachers, and making sure that whatever, because that's more along the lines of community development. And the way that we develop communities is to make sure that we do have workforce housing so that we can afford, so that those individuals can afford the housing. So I agree there as well.
That sounds like you'd be supportive of.
Oh, yes. I thank you all for allowing me to take up such a chunk of your meeting tonight and for the opportunity to talk about the county that we all love so much. I have to apologize. My daughter, who's 12, came home from camp this evening. I picked her up. She had been away for 3 days with her class. I didn't get to hear all the gross details about the camp. I told her I'm going to a couple of meetings and I'll be right back. So I won't stay for the remainder of the meeting. If you would excuse me, I do want to go home and hear, 7th grade is apparently a very exciting time. There's a lot of drama in 7th grade. So I do want to go home and hear from her. But thank you all so very, very much for your time tonight. And for allowing me.
All right, well, thank you again for joining us. And if people wish to get in contact with her, I'm sure Tyler can provide to us.
Sure.
Oh, you got it?
I wanted a picture.
Oh, okay. I'm sure Tyler can provide us some information if you want to get in contact with her further, just as a follow-up. Okay, are there any other announcements?
Come get your red hot t-shirts.
Okay, well, if there are no other announcements, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second? All in favor? Aye. Okay, thank you guys so much. I look forward to seeing you next month.